Welcome back, sleepyheads. Tonight you'll be attempting something truly impossible, getting hired in ancient Rome. You've dressed the part, tunic slightly wrinkled, breath lightly scented with panic and leftover lentils. You rehearsed answers in Latin. Unfortunately, they were questions, but it's fine. You're optimistic. You're determined. You have experience stacking scrolls and not dying in stampedes. Surely someone's hiring. Spoiler, they're not. Rome doesn't hire, it tolerates. If you want a job, you'll need bribes, bloodlines, or divine intervention, preferably all three and written on a wax tablet shaped like Jupiter's smug face. The competition? Former gladiators, overly enthusiastic scribes, and a goat named Felix who just got promoted. So, fluff your pillow, uncurl your anxiety, and prepare to fail upward through the world's most confusing employment system. This isn't a career ladder, it's a very tall column covered in oil. Let's see what happens when you apply to Rome South. You want a job in ancient Rome? That's adorable. You arrive in the heart of the empire with nothing but dusty sandals, the faint smell of goat, and the delusional hope that your experience as an unpaid intern in your cousin's fish stall qualifies you for employment. Rome is vast, brutal, and breathtaking. It's also not hiring, not in the way you think. This is a city where career paths are determined by birthright, bribes, or your ability to not die in a riot. Job interviews, not exactly a thing. Performance evaluations, more like public executions, but with fewer comment cards. Your modern resume is utterly useless here, unless it's carved into a stone slab, written in Latin, and comes with a recommendation from someone who once assassinated a consul. Nobody cares, and even then it better rhyme. You're not here for a promotion, you're here for a miracle. Employment in Rome isn't about talent, it's about status. And you have none. You are what Romans would call ignobilis, which translates roughly to not worth inviting to dinner unless you're also the roast. Your options are limited unless you count corpse number 3 in a gladiator warm-up as career mobility. Let's go over your options. Option 1, slave. This isn't a job per se, it's a condition. But hey, it comes with room and board. And by room, we mean a corner of a kitchen with a rat named Marcus. Option 2, labourer. You get paid in bread and bruises to carry things no human body was designed to lift. The work is honest. The injuries are permanent. Option 3, bathhouse attendant. Think of it as being a towel with hands. You mop up other people's dignity while listening to complaints about the water temperature and the empire's moral decline. There are fancier titles: scribe, tutor, merchant, temple cleaner. But those require connections, literacy, or a personality that doesn't inspire spontaneous arrests. Senators? Don't make me laugh. Senators are born, not interviewed. Their application process involves having grandparents who owned other people and a chin that looks good on coins. You wander into the forum, the beating heart of Roman public life, where everything smells like ambition, olive oil, and mild threat. Men in togas shout about justice, while pickpockets help themselves to unattended sandals. Statues of stern-looking gods stare down at you like they already know you won't make it. You try asking about openings at a public services recruitment bench, which is a glorified stool next to a wine cellar. The man sitting there eyes you up and down. You tell him you're here to work. He laughs so hard he nearly chokes on his grape. He hands you a wax tablet. It reads, Gutter Maintenance Assistant. Bring your own stick. No cowards. Pay, maybe. And this is what counts as onboarding. There's no human resources department, only human remains. Your benefits package is surviving until payday, which might not come unless you collect it personally from a man named Brutilus, who doesn't believe in shirts. So no, you're not going to land a cushy position in the Senate or even a moderately stable job cleaning philosopher sandals. You're going to hustle, sweat, bribe, flatter, and possibly pray to Mercury with a mouth full of garlic. And if you're very lucky, you'll be ignored. Welcome to the workforce, Roman edition. Now grab that stick. You've got gutters to chase rats out of. Before you open your mouth at a Roman job interview, you're already making statements with your outfit. And those statements include, but are not limited to, I am a citizen, I am a slave, or I've recently mugged a senator. In Rome, fashion isn't about self-expression, it's about broadcasting your status loud enough to be heard by everyone without needing to speak, because speaking out of turn is how you end up volunteering for the next gladiator match. Let's start with the tunic. It's the basic Roman unit of clothing. If you're wearing a tunic, you're either a laborer, a child, or someone whose toga got repossessed. Tunics are short, sleeveless, and made from wool that was probably angry during its previous life as a sheep. If yours is clean and belted, you're a respectable citizen. If it's stained and unbelted, you're either a slave or just finished a shift unclogging aqueducts with your bare hands. Now the toga. The toga is Rome's ultimate power outfit. A massive wool sheet draped over your body like you've just lost a fight with your own laundry. Wearing one says, I vote. I sue people. I've made eye contact with a senator without flinching. But it's not casual wear. There are rules. The toga praetexta, trimmed with a purple border, is strictly reserved for magistrates and prepubescent boys with wealthy parents. So unless you're a senator or recently turned 8, maybe don't show up in it. You'll either get stabbed for impersonating the elite or offered a snack and sent to Latin class. Show up underdressed and you'll be mistaken for someone's assistant. Overdress and you'll be mistaken for someone's political rival. Either way, someone's calling security, which in Roman terms is a guy named Titus with a stick and anger management issues. Modern business casual means khakis and a nice shirt. Roman business casual means a toga without vomit stains and sandals that match. Footwear counts too. Calci, leather shoes for citizens. Sandals, acceptable in summer, or if you're feeling philosophical. Barefoot? That's a vibe, but also possibly a crime. Accessorizing is a trap. Rings are status symbols, but too many, and you look like a failed magician. Sashes are fine unless you tie them the wrong way, in which case you've accidentally aligned yourself with a banned cult and will be escorted out by men who pronounce punishment with enthusiasm. And if you're a woman applying for a job, first of all, bold of you, Rome doesn't technically do women in the workplace, but if you're appearing in public, your stola should be modest, your palla neatly arranged, and your hair the result of 3 hours of braiding, prayers, and goat-based pomade. And no, you can't wear trousers. That's how you get blamed for earthquakes. Fashion in Rome isn't about looking good, it's about surviving social judgment. Your outfit is a resume, a security clearance, and a legal document all in one itchy package. Choose wrong and you're not just underdressed. You're unemployed, embarrassed, and possibly enslaved. So before you leave the house, look in the mirror and ask yourself, do I look like someone who belongs here? If the answer is no, congratulations. You've accurately assessed your Roman career prospects. Time to apply for a Roman job? Great. Hand in your resumes. Wait, you don't have one? Weird. Were you not born into a wealthy family with a marble bust of your great-uncle in the atrium and a slave who reads poetry to you at lunch? Let's get one thing straight. Rome doesn't care about your freelance chicken herding experience or your personal blog about amphora restoration. What they want to know is, were you born rich, trained in rhetoric by someone named after a constellation, and possibly descended from Mars himself? No? Then welcome to the other 90% of the population. Your average Roman resume would include things like family name, preferably long and impossible to pronounce, number of battles survived, public offices held, and whether Jupiter has personally sent you a lightning bolt of approval, or at least hasn't smited you recently. What it doesn't include is any mention of transferable skills. The only thing transferable in Rome is debt. If you were born into slavery, congratulations, you now have job security. Slaves were property, yes, but skilled ones were in high demand. Cooks, scribes, tutors, accountants, even hairdressers. You could become essential to a household, loved even, right up until you were sold to cover someone's gambling losses. Your resume doesn't matter if you can't walk fast while carrying hot soup. free but poor? Your resume is your body. Can you lift a marble column? You're a builder. Can you run really fast without dropping a message? You're a courier. Can you survive a shipwreck? Navy it is. Job training usually involved being yelled at until you stopped doing things wrong or died. If you really want to impress someone in Rome, forget listing your job history. Instead, show up with a powerful patron who owes you a favor, a scar from a battle you technically weren't supposed to be in, and a toga that screams, "I know people who matter." Bonus points if you don't smell like fermented fish. You might think being educated would help. And it might if your education includes poetry, legal jargon, or the ability to recite epic tragedies without blinking. But if you learn to read from a drunk uncle or an especially literate goat, don't mention it. Stick to nodding wisely and quoting philosophers nobody else in the room has read. So what does your Roman resume actually look like? It's probably verbal, delivered by a slightly drunk uncle at a dinner party while gesturing wildly and spilling wine. This one, strong hands, built a whole roof once, mostly held, only collapsed a bit, very polite about it. You're hired. If you want to make it in Rome, forget bullet points and formatting. Your resume is written in scars, sweat, and social proximity to powerful men with questionable ethics. Hope you've got at least one of those. Your resume is a disaster. Your tunic smells like wet goat. And the job board just fell over to avoid being associated with you. Time for your last hope, networking, or as Romans call it, strategic groveling in sandals. In Rome, getting a job has less to do with skill and more to do with who thinks you're not entirely useless. That's where the patron-client system comes in. You find a rich, powerful person, your patron, and cling to them like a desperate barnacle on the hull of opportunity. They help you out. You serve them loyally. It's like LinkedIn, if LinkedIn involved more public bowing and fewer inspirational posts about pottery startups. Every morning, clients line up outside their patron's house for the salutatio. You stand there with a gift in hand and hope the patron remembers you as that helpful young man, and not the one who knocked over the olive cart. When your turn comes, you enter, smile like your life depends on it, because it kind of does, and offer something nice, wine, fruit, a compliment, or maybe a deeply unsettling poem about loyalty. Your patron might give you something back, a coin, a job lead, or the opportunity to stand closer to them at public events and pretend you're important. This is called proximity success. You don't need skills. You need to hover near someone with power until their status rubs off on you like glitter at a toga party. Be warned, patrons collect clients like other people collect curses. You're not special. You're part of a crowd, all smiling, nodding, and praying you don't get asked to recite Virgil. If you say something foolish, wear the wrong sandals, or sneeze during a blessing, you could go from promising assistant to guy who cleans up after the sacrificial goat. Don't worry though. There's always a chance to redeem yourself by running errands that range from mildly humiliating to should we contact your next of kin. Sometimes it's delivering messages. Sometimes it's escorting the patron's cousin to court because he's forgotten how walking works. One time, it was holding a torch while your patron publicly denounced a political rival. You got a tunic out of it, mostly not burned. Good patrons are rare, great ones are practically gods. If you manage to impress one, they might write you a glowing recommendation, or at least a lukewarm endorsement like, "He has a face I vaguely trust." That's gold. That's your golden ticket to possibly scrubbing fewer statues next week. Just remember, networking in Rome isn't about who you know, it's about who pretends to know you when other people are watching. It's not a friendship, it's an audition, every day, forever. So get out there, polish your compliments, and hope the senator's sandals are extra shiny today. Also, don't ask what happened to the last client, just smile. And maybe bring grapes. Let's be honest, you came to Rome hoping for a career, maybe something with advancement, benefits, maybe a lunch break that doesn't involve wild dogs and existential dread. But Rome isn't here to make your dreams come true. It's here to turn you into one of three things: a cog, a cautionary tale, or a corpse. The Roman job market isn't built on opportunity, it's built on slavery, like a lot of slavery. The entire system runs on unpaid, overworked, and occasionally flammable labor. You could throw a stone and hit 3 slaves before it lands in a senator's wine cup. Not that we recommend throwing stones. Romans get weird about that. Roughly 1 in 3 people in Rome is a slave. They're doing everything: cooking, cleaning, bookkeeping, tutoring, farming, gladiating, and occasionally standing really still at parties to look expensive. Some are highly skilled, some are barely alive. All are property. If you're wondering what your competition looks like, imagine someone who works 20 hours a day, never complains, and costs less than a goat. Now try asking for a raise. Jobs that aren't done by slaves are usually done by freedmen, former slaves who now have the honor of being legally free but socially ignored. They work in trades, run shops, or serve their old masters in slightly fancier outfits. If you think this sounds better, it is. Barely. At least you get to keep your name, unless your old master renamed you Petey and it's stuck. So where does that leave you? Well, unless you've got family connections, a talent for flattery, or an uncle in the Senate, your options are limited. You might land a gig as a porter, a messenger, or a bathhouse mop technician. You'll be paid in copper coins and bruises. Benefits include seeing what's left of your dignity in a puddle. And don't expect stability. Rome doesn't do contracts unless you're important or extremely litigious. You'll take the jobs no one else wants, get paid late, if at all, and be replaced by someone younger, cheaper, or more enthusiastic about hauling bricks with their spine. There's no HR, no union. If you get injured on the job, congratulations, you're now a liability. Your boss might let you go, gently. More likely, you'll be reassigned to yelling at pigeons in the forum. If you're lucky, you'll become indispensable to someone rich and slightly lazy. Maybe you're great at polishing sandals. Maybe you make a mean garum. Maybe you just know how to listen and nod without crying. Either way, that's your golden ticket. Be slightly more useful than the guy next to you. Because in Rome, employment isn't about what you do, it's about what you survive. So smile, grab a broom, and try not to look too hopeful. Hope makes people nervous around here. Welcome to your first day at the Roman office, where the job title means less than the family crest, and the break room is just a courtyard with suspicious pigeons. There are no desks, no emails, and definitely no HR department unless you count Mars, god of war, and he's not great with complaints. Work culture in Rome is a bizarre mix of religion, routine, and outright chaos. Every job begins and ends with the gods. You don't just clock in, you light a candle, chant something reverent, and sprinkle wine in the general direction of a household deity who may or may not be in the mood to bless your miserable shift. Skip the morning sacrifice and boom, your boss's goat dies and now it's somehow your fault. Each workplace has its own vibe. A scribe's office smells like old ink and regret. A bathhouse hums with gossip and humidity. And a senator's estate, equal parts political drama and domestic mayhem. Co-workers range from chain-smoking scribes with ink-stained fingers to overly cheerful cooks who swear the soup isn't cursed this time. You won't find trust falls or company retreats, but you will find shrines in break rooms and co-workers who can recite poetry while balancing amphore. You know, culture. Team bonding mostly involves not dying together. You and Gaius once spent 4 hours carrying a statue up a hill, and now you're blood brothers, or blood blisters. Either way, it counts. Lunch is a gamble. If you're lucky, you'll sit on a crate behind the stables and gnaw on some bread that predates Julius Caesar. If you're not, you'll be chewing while being shouted at by your superior for not properly dusting the lair's shrine. Pro tip: always look busy when holding food. It helps you survive longer. Discipline is swift and dramatic. Drop a scroll, get scolded. Drop a senator's scroll, you're now a field archivist stationed in Gaul. Promotions exist, but they usually involve your boss getting murdered or spontaneously combusting from stress. Either way, congrats. Then there's Saturnalia, the closest thing to an office party. Everyone switches roles, slaves pretend to be masters, wine flows like regret, and someone ends up reciting dirty poetry to a statue. It's tradition. Try not to vomit in the decorative fountain unless you want to be that guy until next Saturnalia. Speaking of vomit, yes, it's culturally endorsed. At banquets, it's considered polite. Not doing it suggests weakness or a tragically small appetite. The trick is to do it discreetly, somewhere decorative, and not while your employer is mid-toast. That's not a faux pas, it's a firing offence. So here's your survival guide. Bow to everything, agree with everyone, and never ask questions unless you enjoy being blamed for eclipses. Roman office culture rewards loyalty, superstition, and a suspicious tolerance for goat-based ceremonies. And remember, if the statues start bleeding, don't panic. That's just another Tuesday. Welcome aboard. After all the prayers, favors, and toga ironing, you've finally landed an interview. Sort of. It's less a formal process and more a stress test disguised as a conversation. You arrive in what passes for a waiting area, an open courtyard lined with columns overseen by a half-bored statue of Mercury and a fully bored clerk holding a stylus like it owes him money. You're sweating through your tunic while squinting at the panel of officials whose job it is to ask questions, assess your usefulness, and make you question every decision that led to this moment. There's no friendly greeting, no tell me about yourself. Instead, the lead examiner opens with a cheerful, "Have you ever personally insulted Jupiter?" You shake your head, unsure whether to look insulted or flattered. The next question comes fast. Can you handle sacred poultry? You think it's a joke. It is not. The job might involve handling temple chickens, which are revered for their ability to predict the future by how enthusiastically they peck at grain. A wrong answer could make you a suspect in divine sabotage. A man scribbles furiously on a wax tablet. Another leans in and whispers, "If a senator throws a scroll at you in anger, do you a duck? B, catch it? Or C, pretend it was your fault?" Before you answer, he smiles and says, "Trick question. The correct answer is to catch it, read it, and offer to translate it into heroic verse." Then comes a physical challenge. How many amphorae can you carry while reciting your lineage? You guess 3, which earns a nod and a frown. We need 5. And we hope your father's name isn't Lucius again. We're full on Luciuses. Suddenly, a trumpet sounds. Someone enters wearing a ceremonial helmet and asks if you know how to interpret thunder. You say, "It sounds loud." They say, "He's literal. Could be useful." Another asks your greatest weakness. You mutter something about perfectionism. They laugh. "Mine's poisoning. Let's move on." Then you're handed a wax tablet and asked to write a loyalty oath in your best cursive. The stylus is crooked, the wax smells faintly of goat, and the sentence involves promising your undying service to Rome, the Republic, and someone's cousin's bakery. You're asked to shout a warning in Latin, then to whisper a secret in Greek, then to explain a minor omen involving birds and spilled wine. By this point, you're sweating, dizzy, and wondering if this is still an interview or an ancient game show where the prize is not getting fed to lions. Finally, a man with trembling hands and a toga that's seen too much asks, "Why do you want this job?" You say the first thing that sounds noble: to serve Rome. They pause, murmur approvingly, and someone gently rings a bell. You're hired. For what? You're not sure. Possibly to count wheat, possibly to escort holy pigs. You'll find out tomorrow when someone hands you a tool, points toward a hill, and says, "Start digging, and don't anger the shrine." So if your modern interview had confusing questions, remember this. At least no one asked if you could wrestle a goose to honor Mars. Rome doesn't want your experience. It wants your willingness to smile while being trampled by tradition. So you want a respectable job. You're tired of the latrines, the scroll sorting, and the mild chance of death by falling amphora. You're aiming higher. You want to work at a temple. Sounds nice, right? Quiet, sacred, incense instead of sewage. Maybe a part-time gig with the gods. But be warned, divine employment is less heavenly and more constant paranoia wrapped in ritual. First, there is no application form. You can't just knock on the temple door and hand in a wax tablet that says, "Good with chickens, praise Jupiter." Temple roles are usually inherited, appointed by elite families, or chosen by divine sign, which sounds majestic, until you realize it could mean sneezing near a priest while Mercury is in retrograde. Let's assume you're lucky, or unlucky, enough to be considered. You're now entering a workplace where your boss might be invisible, immortal, and easily offended by the way you light candles. The gods demand attention to detail. One misplaced incense grain and boom, plague. Or worse, someone scolds you in Latin poetry. Your duties could include sweeping sacred floors, maintaining shrines, feeding symbolic animals, or preparing sacrificial offerings. That last one sounds noble until you're ankle-deep in goat and trying to remember whether Mars prefers rosemary or frankincense. And then there are the festivals. Think religious holidays, except they last 3 days, involve public chanting, a parade of masked flute players, and you having to wear a ceremonial outfit that looks like it was designed by a blindfolded octopus. If you trip during the procession, that's an omen. If you smile at the wrong statue, that's heresy. If a bird flies overhead in the wrong direction, congratulations, you've doomed the harvest. Promotion? Sure. If you survive long enough and don't accidentally insult Apollo by sneezing during his hymn, you might get to manage temple inventory. That means counting sacred oils, blessing wine shipments, and dealing with visiting aristocrats who think they can bribe Jupiter with figs. The perks? You get to eat leftover offerings unless they're cursed. You occasionally receive public recognition, usually in the form of being pointed at during ceremonies. And you live under divine protection, unless the gods are busy, angry, or playing dice with your fate. Still, it's considered an honor. Temple workers are seen as pious, trustworthy, and slightly terrifying, and the public treats you with the same mix of reverence and fear, usually reserved for lightning and senators with ulcers. So yes, the temple is hiring, but before you apply, ask yourself, do you like fire? Can you memorize 30 different ways to bow? Are you okay with being blamed for eclipses? If the answer is yes, congratulations. You're ready to serve the gods, the state, and the city's overwhelming love of ceremony. Just remember to smile. The statues are always watching. So you've been turned down by the temples, ignored by the scribes, and somehow managed to offend a goose sacred to Juno. Where do you go next? The arena, that glorious meat grinder of public entertainment and shredded dignity. Becoming a gladiator isn't just a career, it's a temporary agreement with death, drama, and dust. The job title sounds exciting. Gladiator. It rolls off the tongue. It makes you sound powerful. But in reality, it's just the ancient Roman equivalent of unpaid overtime, except instead of burnout, you get an actual burning spear to the chest. The hiring process is simple. Be a slave, a prisoner of war, or someone very desperate and slightly unhinged. Volunteering is technically an option, but that's like volunteering to be a lightning rod during a thunderstorm, technically allowed, definitely not wise. Training begins at the Ludus, or gladiator school, which sounds scholarly until you realize it's mostly yelling, bleeding, and running in circles while holding a weapon bigger than your torso. Your teacher? A retired gladiator missing 3 fingers and the ability to blink evenly. He teaches you the basics, how to swing a sword, how to not cry in public, and how to dramatically fall for maximum crowd sympathy. You get meals, sure, mostly beans and occasional meat. If no one important died that day, you sleep in a cell, you wear armor that was clearly designed by someone who hated spines, and you practice every day, because one wrong move in the arena and you're not just fired, your funeral. Then comes your debut. The arena smells like sweat, sand, and ambition. Thousands of Romans screaming, betting, booing, and throwing things. You're shoved into the ring with a net, a trident, and the sincere hope that you remember which end of the weapon points toward the other guy. Sometimes you fight animals, sometimes you fight criminals, sometimes you fight another confused man named Marcus who you swear you met at dinner last week. If you win, you live. If you lose, you die. If you're very lucky and extremely dramatic, The crowd might spare you with a thumbs up. But don't count on it. Romans love drama, but they also love closure. There's no retirement plan. If you survive enough fights, you might earn your freedom. Or more likely, you'll become a fan favorite and get scheduled for increasingly absurd death matches like Man vs. 4 Angry Ostriches or Sword Duel on a Seesaw. And yet, gladiators are celebrities. Children know your name. Women swoon. Men cheer. Your face might appear on graffiti or clay mugs. You'll be beloved until the next big fight, when someone younger, flashier, or taller shows up and steals your spotlight. So yes, it's a job. Yes, it's exciting. But if the thought of being stabbed while wearing a leather kilt in front of 20,000 people doesn't appeal to you, maybe stick to sweeping temple steps. At least the statues don't bite. Let's say you've decided against gladiator school because you value your organs arranged in the correct order. You want something more dignified, less blood, more togas. Welcome to the Senate. Here, politics is less about governing and more about surviving a verbal knife fight while smiling politely across a marble table. First, you don't apply for the Senate, you inherit it, marry into it, or slip into it like a very expensive pair of sandals. You must be a male Roman citizen of the elite class, own land, possess a family name that sounds like a spell, and ideally descend from someone who once made eye contact with a god and didn't combust. Bonus if your nose looks good carved in stone. The Senate doesn't do resumes. Your qualifications are 1. Not being poor, and 2. Not being caught committing treason this week. If you manage both, you're on your way. You walk into the Curia, Julia draped in a toga with the authority of someone who has never carried their own groceries. Your colleagues greet you with wary nods and subtle side eyes, because here, friendship ends when the ink dries on your legislation. Once inside, the work begins, which is to say, hours of speeches, arguments, public hand-wringing, and thinly veiled threats disguised as civic concern. You'll sit through heated debates about military funding, temple renovations, and why Gaius keeps parking his chariot like he owns the road, which he might. Public speaking is your sword, rhetoric is your shield. A skilled senator can spend 6 hours denouncing the moral decay of society while secretly approving the same debauchery at his own villa. You must speak often, loudly, and with enough dramatic pauses to make a Vestal Virgin weep. If your audience claps, good. If they fall asleep, try quoting Virgil. If they throw produce, dodge. That's not metaphorical. But the Senate isn't just endless talking. It's alliances forged over wine, broken over cheese, and sealed with a handshake that might also be a threat. Behind every polite toast is a silent calculation of who can be trusted and who can be blamed when things go wrong. And things will go wrong. That's the only guarantee in Roman politics. You'll attend elaborate banquets where senators pretend to be friends right before bribing each other's assistants. You'll host philosophical discussions that somehow end in a duel, and you'll navigate political storms that make literal ones seem relaxing. You'll raise your hand to vote even if you don't know what you're voting on, because asking questions is a sign of weakness, or worse, honesty. Yes, there's status, yes, there's power, but there's also danger, constant scrutiny, and the lingering fear that someone will accuse you of sacrilege, theft, or liking bad poetry. Being a senator is less like holding office and more like starring in a very long, very public murder mystery. Still, it's the dream. You wear fine robes, you get invited to exclusive rituals. And if you don't mess up too spectacularly, someone might build a statue of you that pigeons will someday admire. Just keep your speeches sharp, your enemies closer, and your poison tester on speed dial. Also, never turn your back during a toast, especially if it's Gaius doing the pouring. If you've ever dreamed of a job where the pen is mightier than the sword, mainly because your arms are too tired to lift a sword, then the Roman scriba role is for you. Imagine a world without printers, carbon copies, or undo buttons, and you'll begin to grasp the exquisite agony of being a scribe in ancient Rome. Your job? copying documents all day, every day, contracts, decrees, census forms, witness statements, temple rosters, military rolls, love letters disguised as tax forms. If it can be written, you're the one writing it, by hand, in cramped quarters, with a stylus that hates you and ink that evaporates when you breathe too loudly. Your shift starts at dawn because apparently sleep is for patricians and goats. You report to your desk, which might just be a board across two barrels, and begin translating the verbal commands of someone who uses 10 words where 2 would suffice. Your writing posture is ergonomic in the same way that falling downstairs is good for leg day. After a few hours, your back feels like it's been whipped by Minerva herself. Mistakes aren't tolerated. Transpose 2 numerals and you might accidentally declare war on a neighboring town. Misspell a name and suddenly you've freed a slave, arrested a priest, or reclassified a senator as a street performer. One poor guy once forgot a line in a building contract and caused an entire bathhouse to be installed upside down. He now copies labels for amphorae in a cave. But it's not all gloom. The scriba is at the center of Rome's bureaucracy, which means you're a fly on the marble walls of history. You know who's getting promoted, who's secretly married, who's pregnant, who's pretending not to be, all before breakfast. You are the original gossip columnist with better Latin and worse lighting. The social hierarchy places you somewhere above the stable boy but just below the guy who cleans vomit at banquets. Still, if your calligraphy is crisp and your Latin sassy but accurate, you might attract a patron, a wealthy one with snacks, maybe even a better chair. There are perks. You're indoors most days, you rarely have to fight anyone, except emotionally, and your fingers develop the kind of strength normally reserved for gladiators and cheese vendors. If you survive long enough, you could be promoted to notarius, which is a scribe who gets to sit in on Senate meetings and transcribe every eye roll and passive-aggressive speech. Dream big. And then there's the ink. It gets everywhere. Your tunic, your hands, your dreams. You'll start to smell like a manuscript and occasionally find sentences floating behind your eyelids. Your mother won't recognize you without smudges. You will come to accept this. So if you want a life of precision, privacy, papyrus, and permanent back pain, join the scribes. It's not glamorous, but it is essential. And somewhere in the archives of eternity, your perfect handwriting might outlast the emperors. Just make sure to spell their names right. There's honest work, and then there's Roman construction. One earns you a loaf of bread and a handful of blisters. The other earns you those, plus the chance to be crushed by your own contribution to the skyline. And guess which one you're signing up for? Builders in Rome aren't artisans. They're meat-powered cranes with dreams of surviving until payday. Your job begins before sunrise and ends when someone yells, "Stop lifting!" which usually only happens after someone passes out or a senator complains about the noise. No training required. They hand you a tool, point to a pile of stone, and expect you to move it, stack it, or chisel it until it resembles architecture. Plans, vague sketches, safety standards, eye contact with the gods. If something collapses, it was your fault. If it doesn't collapse, the architect gets a triumph and you get a limp. You work on everything: roads, aqueducts, temples, public baths, monuments, sewer systems. Each site is a chorus of shouting, huffing, hammering, and the occasional divine curse from a foreman who thinks he's Jupiter with a clipboard. There's no such thing as a quiet day, unless someone important dies, and even then you're probably building the funeral pyre. Falling is common, concussions, frequent amputations. Let's not get into it. The scaffolding is made of hope and twine, the ladders squeak with existential dread, and the pulleys function on prayer alone. You don't ask questions, you don't look down, you don't trust the guy who says it's secure now, because his name is Flavius and he's been hit in the head too many times. The pay comes in copper coins, sometimes salted fish, always disappointment. Benefits include third-degree sunburns, involuntary tattoos made of grime, and a level of back pain that qualifies as a religious experience. Vacations don't exist, but if you lose consciousness for long enough, someone might assume you've taken one. But there's camaraderie. A special kind of brotherhood formed over splinters, shared wine, and the common knowledge that any day could be your last. You and your crew develop a rhythm. Lift, curse, sweat, repeat. You may be building an aqueduct, but emotionally, you're digging your own grave, together. You'll also get to learn fun phrases like structural instability, who moved the keystone, and that wall wasn't leaning yesterday. You'll become fluent in the language of grunts, glares, and that one universal scream of a guy realizing he's standing under a falling column. Despite the risks and bruises, there's an odd sort of pride in pointing to something massive and stone-bound and whispering, "I hauled that rock and only cried once." Future poets may write about emperors and generals, but you'll be the anonymous muscle behind every triumphal arch and over-engineered bathhouse. Your job is painful, thankless, and stupidly dangerous, but it's yours. So if you like sore muscles, shouting in Latin, and a job where your biggest enemy is gravity and your best friend is a dented bucket, welcome to construction. Rome wasn't built in a day, but you might be broken in one. If being despised by the general population sounds like a bonus feature instead of a red flag, then congratulations, you're publican material. Ancient Rome's tax collectors were feared, loathed, and almost certainly not invited to their own birthday parties. Publicans were not civil servants in the traditional sense. They were private contractors who paid the Roman state for the right to squeeze as much money as possible out of a province. It's like buying a vineyard and then charging people for the privilege of breathing near your grapes. It's legal, barely. To succeed, you need three things: a head for numbers, a stomach for hatred, and a face that doesn't flinch when someone throws cabbage. Your job involves collecting taxes on land, property, trade, inheritance, slave ownership, temple donations, and possibly sunlight. If something moves, you tax it. If it doesn't, you tax it harder. The locals do not love you. In fact, the publican is often seen as a parasite in a fancy toga. People cross the street to avoid you. Children hiss. Dogs growl. Grandmothers clutch their purses and whisper curses in Etruscan. You respond with fines or fees or politely worded threats involving delayed compliance adjustments. You will need a team, muscle-bound assistants for persuasion, a scribe to make it all look legal, and a lawyer who can talk in circles until even Jupiter forgets what the issue was. Your house will need guards, your wine will need testing, your conscience irrelevant. But here's the upside. The money is fantastic. And if you play your cards right, you can live like a minor god, villas, servants, feasts, private performances of subpar poetry about how taxes build civilization. Spoiler, they build resentment faster. And then there's the influence. Want to curry favor with a senator? Waive a shipping tax? Want to ruin a merchant? Schedule an audit. Publicans may not be loved, but they are respected in the way that scorpions and volcanic eruptions are respected. You'll climb the ranks by expanding territories, making friends in high places, and keeping meticulous records that say absolutely nothing. Eventually, you'll sponsor games, temples, or fountains shaped like your face. Though, be warned, they may double as public urinals. You'll also need to master the delicate art of bribery, which Romans politely call facilitated generosity. You grease a few palms, overlook a few inconsistencies, and suddenly you're receiving praise for efficient revenue enhancement. Even the emperor might notice you, ideally for your loyalty, not your accounting scandals. So if you want wealth without affection, respect without warmth, and the power to financially ruin your enemies while wearing a stylish belt, welcome to the life of a Roman publican. It's lucrative, dangerous, and only slightly more moral than piracy. Just don't turn your back during Saturnalia. They throw things. So you've decided against politics, construction, and collecting taxes from armed farmers. Good choice. You're thinking medicine, something noble, helpful, maybe even spiritual. Unfortunately, in ancient Rome, medicine is less about healing and more about creative guesses with a side of bleeding. Becoming a healer isn't about going to medical school. It's about convincing people that you know which herbs won't kill them. If you're a man, you might become a physician. If you're a woman, congratulations, you're probably a midwife. Your training is hands-on, your salary is inconsistent, and your chances of seeing something horrifying before lunch are 100%. Let's talk midwifery. It's not just delivering babies, it's delivering babies in alleys, kitchens, temples, or fields, usually while being screamed at by someone with no painkillers. You bring towels, warm water, and the vague hope that the gods are paying attention. Your job also includes stitching, advising, massaging, praying, and occasionally shouting at the father to stop fainting. Midwives must know anatomy, astrology, and how to navigate social politics. Deliver the wrong baby for the wrong household, and suddenly you're accused of everything from incompetence to sorcery. Still, good midwives were respected mostly until something went wrong. Then they were blamed, always. And what about doctors? Roman physicians practiced a mix of Greek theory, trial and error, and bold overconfidence. They loved diagnosing based on humours, 4 bodily fluids that determined everything from your health to your fashion sense. If you had too much black bile, you were sad, too much yellow bile, angry, too much blood, party animal. Treatment options included bleeding, leeches, vomiting, herbal compresses, hot baths, cold baths, yelling at the moon, and the occasional chicken sacrifice. Surgery existed, but anesthesia did not, so procedures often doubled as group trauma events. Surgeons carried terrifying tools and names like bone scoop and flesh hook. You do not want to be the person they practice on. And yet Roman medicine worked, sometimes. Doctors learned how to reset bones, clean wounds, and even perform rudimentary eye surgeries. The problem was that most of them believed sneezing direction could determine your fate. You could die from a papyrus cut or survive a javelin to the spleen depending on how the augurs felt that morning. Hospitals, mostly for soldiers. Regular people got home visits, often from someone who also delivered pigs and performed minor exorcisms. Privacy didn't exist. If you were ill, neighbors came to comment, pray, or rate your dying posture. Still, for all its chaos, medicine had its heroes. Midwives who saved lives, doctors who didn't panic, herbalists who knew which plants actually helped and which ones just made your dreams weird. It was messy, risky, and occasionally miraculous. So if you're calm under pressure, unfazed by fluids, and willing to argue with Saturn over someone's liver condition, you might just survive in Roman medicine. Just remember, if the gods don't kill the patient, your co-workers might. You're not looking for glory. You're not hoping to inspire poets or get your likeness carved into temple marble. You just want a job, something that pays, preferably in actual money and not mysterious fish sauce. Welcome to the trades, the real Roman economy, one loaf, cutlet, and loud market stall at a time. Let's start with baking. On the surface, it sounds lovely. Warm bread, soft crusts, cheerful mornings. But Roman bakeries run on ash, sweat, and pre-dawn exhaustion. You're up before the sun, heating a massive communal oven with whatever burns. Wood, charcoal, maybe old scrolls from rejected tax forms. You mix flour by hand, knead dough with your elbows, and pray the heat doesn't melt your eyebrows. Your reward? The city's carb-starved citizens queue up before you've even wiped the soot off your face. They want bread, and they want it now. Burn one loaf, and you're a villain. Deliver fresh focaccia, and you're briefly a hero. Either way, you'll smell like yeast for the rest of your life. Next up, butchers. It's a job for people with strong stomachs and stronger noses. You work with knives, animals, and customers who think they know more about goat ribs than you do. Most of your day involves dismembering livestock with speed and accuracy, while also fending off stray dogs and judgmental old ladies. The upside, you'll never go hungry. The downside, you're always covered in something. Blood, fur, or the kind of juice that defies scientific explanation. Butchers are essential, respected, feared, occasionally blessed by priests to cleanse the carnage. And then there's the booth operators, the lifeblood of the Roman market. You sell anything and everything: wine, oil, fish, sandals, knockoff perfume, and questionably sourced trinkets. Your voice must carry across 3 yelling matches, a stampede of chickens, and a small child reciting Virgil from a barrel. Booth duty involves long hours, bartering skills, and a personal relationship with the weather. Too hot? No customers. Too rainy? Fewer customers. Plague outbreak? No customers and several ghosts. You stand, shout, smile, and occasionally threaten. Sales are a form of performance art, and your props include stale dates, half-price tunics, and a sign that says, "Blessed by Apollo," even though you definitely just made that up. But the trade world is where Rome breathes. It's noisy, smelly, vibrant, and brutally honest. Nobody cares about your lineage, your rhetoric, or your philosophical opinions on soup. Can you deliver? Can you haggle? Can you sell a cracked amphora with confidence? If so, there's a place for you. It's not glamorous, but it's steady. It feeds your family, buys your sandals, and occasionally allows you to upgrade from hungry to slightly less hungry. So here's your booth, your bread peel, or your cleaver. Welcome to the working class. Don't drop the goat. Let's say you like travel. You crave the sea. You've dreamed of seeing the coasts of Gaul, the shores of Hispania, and maybe getting a tan that screams Mediterranean suffering. Then boy, do we have the gig for you, rowing a Roman galley. This is less job and more punishment with a horizon. Rowers aren't just employees, they're fuel. Literal manpower propelling a warship or merchant vessel through open water, choppy storms, and the occasional pirate encounter. You're not hired, you're chained. Sometimes metaphorically, sometimes very much literally. Your day begins before dawn with a whistle, a yell, or a boot to the ribs. You and about 100 other sweaty strangers sit on a narrow bench, shoulder to shoulder, with one oar between two of you. No one talks much. You're too busy praying your neighbor doesn't throw up before breakfast. Once you're in position, a drummer sets the pace. Yes, an actual drummer. No, it's not fun. He's not there for ambiance. He's there to make sure you don't fall out of rhythm. If you do, you get yelled at, splashed, or smacked. Teamwork is not optional. It's survival. You row for hours. You row while baking under the sun, drenched in sea spray and your own sweat. You row during naval battles where flaming arrows land near your feet. You row while being insulted by a centurion who's never touched an oar in his life. You row while wondering what you did in a past life to deserve this. Your meals? Porridge and disappointment. Your accommodations? A wooden bench with the cushioning of regrets. Your benefits package includes blisters, chronic dehydration, and the deep spiritual enlightenment that comes from doing the same motion 10,000 times while staring at another man's back. And don't even think about slacking. Roman ships don't stop because you're tired. They stop because you're dead. If someone keels over mid-row, you row around them. If the ship crashes, you swim. If you can't swim, you sink. A career change often involves drowning. But let's say you survive. Let's say you're strong, consistent, and too stubborn to die. There's the slightest, tiniest chance you'll be promoted to something marginally better. Maybe you become a deckhand. Maybe you even touch land once in a while. Maybe someone throws you a coin and calls you reliable. The upside? You'll be ripped. Your arms will have the density of temple columns. Your back will look like a topographical map of the Apennines. You'll gain the ability to sleep through thunder and ignore pain like a marble statue. You'll also learn to curse Poseidon in 3 languages. So if you like travel, have no other options, and believe gyms should involve mortal peril, welcome aboard. Just don't drop your oar, they'll notice. If you've ever looked at a wild animal and thought, I could manage that, then congratulations. You're already halfway to becoming one of ancient Rome's most high-risk professionals. Animal handling wasn't just a job, it was an exercise in daily survival, mixed with heavy lifting, scratch-resistant tunics, and a willingness to stare death in the snout. Animal handlers could be found anywhere in Roman life. They were in the bustling markets, wrangling goats into pens while being yelled at by merchants. They worked the temples, making sure sacred geese didn't attack priests mid-blessing. They were the backstage crew in the arena, prepping bears for battle, lions for symbolic execution, and ostriches for dramatic exits. You were part zookeeper, part stage manager, part mobile target. Let's talk logistics. Every morning you check your list, feed the wolves, calm the leopard, find the missing goat, again, and clean the cage of whatever died overnight. You haul sacks of meat, replace water troughs, inspect cages that groan like they've developed opinions, and recite prayers to every god who handles not being mauled before breakfast. In the markets, you're selling livestock, which means convincing someone that the cow chewing on your sandal is spirited rather than possessed. In temples, you prep animals for sacrifice. That involves ceremonial cleaning, calming rituals, and making sure nobody swaps out the ox with a slightly less divine stand-in. Yes, that happens. No, it doesn't end well. But the real chaos happens in the arena. On show days, you're the invisible force behind the spectacle. You wrangle everything from imported tigers to grumpy elephants to crocodiles that would rather nap than perform. You ensure the lion enters on cue, the bear stays in its lane, and that none of the animals mistake senators for snacks. You coordinate with gladiators, stagehands, and the one guy who insists the flaming chariot is safe this time. Your job is part choreography, part crisis management. If the tiger bolts toward the audience, it's your fault. If it doesn't bolt, it's still probably your fault. There's no such thing as a quiet shift. Someone's always late, something's always hungry, and some VIP always wants to pet something that shouldn't be touched without armor. You smile, nod, and silently wonder how long it takes to grow back a finger. But despite the danger, there's prestige. You understand beasts. You work with creatures that terrify most men. You can command a panther with a hand signal, guide an ox through a screaming crowd, and retrieve a snake from under a magistrate's chair without breaking a sweat. That's not just skill, it's magic. The pay isn't bad either. Nobles tip well when their panther doesn't eat the furniture. Priests offer blessings. The crowd cheers when you survive. And when things go wrong, well, at least you won't die in obscurity. You'll be the legend who rode a bear out of the Colosseum while shouting, "It wasn't my idea." So if you've got nerves of steel, a flexible spine, and a deep respect for creatures that outweigh you 10 to 1, there's a place for you in Rome's beast-wrangling elite. Just keep your arms inside the enclosure at all times, and don't look the baboon in the eyes. Trust me on that one. So you want a job with power, prestige, a decent robe allowance, and zero risk of being eaten by lions. Welcome to the Roman priesthood. On paper, it's a sacred calling. In practice, it's half smoke, half mirrors, and entirely wrapped in political ambition. Becoming a priest in Rome isn't about divine visions or late-night conversions. It's about family names, connections, and whether your uncle once bribed the right augur. Most priests are born into it. If you're lucky or rich, you might be invited. If not, you better start studying bird entrails and smiling at senators. Your duties depend on the temple. You might oversee sacrifices, interpret omens, maintain sacred fires, or explain to the public why a lightning strike last night means Jupiter wants a new statue. You perform rituals, recite prayers, and occasionally mediate between angry gods and angrier citizens. It's part theatre, part bureaucracy, part existential guessing game. A priest's daily life revolves around ceremony. There's chanting, incense burning, robe folding, and an aggressive amount of standing still. You bless harvests, sanctify marriages, preside over festivals, and sometimes have to explain why someone's goat didn't qualify as ritually pure. Hint, the limp was symbolic. You also get to wield real influence. Priests are trusted advisors, especially when politics get sticky. Is the war favorable to Mars? Is this consul pleasing to the gods? Can we declare a festival long enough to delay a vote? Your answer can shape history, or at least buy the Senate another week of indecision. But it's not all gravitas. Omens are tricky. Misread the flight pattern of birds, and suddenly Rome is cursed. Forget to bless the harvest at the right time, and people start blaming you for every withered fig. Drop the sacred chicken. You're lucky if your robe survives the public outcry. Sneezed at the wrong altar. The city panics. Vestals, meanwhile, carry their own weight. These virginal priestesses keep Rome's eternal flame burning, and Rome absolutely loses its mind if they so much as blink off-beat during a ritual. They live under tight restrictions, surrounded by honor and paranoia. If a Vestal broke her vow of chastity, she was buried alive, and yet, if you were a woman of noble birth, it was still considered a career upgrade. The job does have perks. Priests are exempt from military service and most taxes. You receive ceremonial gifts, front row seating at public games, and access to divine gossip long before it hits the Senate floor. A well-positioned priest could influence laws, diplomacy, and even who got invited to which orgy. You'll also spend a lot of time explaining confusing phenomena, like why an eclipse doesn't mean Jupiter is mad, but why your neighbor's hiccups just might. People look to you for comfort, clarity, and animal-based symbolism. They might not understand what you're doing, but they expect you to do it in rhythm, in style, and without dropping the incense. So if you like rituals, politics, light smoke inhalation, and explaining metaphysical mysteries using animal livers, priesthood might just be your calling. Just remember, every blessing is also a performance, and Rome loves a good show. Let's say you're not interested in war, work, or wrangling crocodiles. You're an intellectual, a lover of books, scrolls, and long walks through philosophical arguments. You want to teach, or at least be paid to sound clever in public. Welcome to Roman education. Becoming a teacher in Rome is an act of hope and self-delusion. If you're a free man with literacy, patience, and zero ambition for personal safety, you might qualify. Teaching was respected sometimes, but more often it was poorly paid, overcrowded, and interrupted by the occasional food fight or pigeon attack. You start at the bottom, literally. Lessons are held in public courtyards, porticos, or the shade of whatever building smells least like horse. You bring your own stool. Your students? Boys from wealthy families who'd rather be anywhere else. Their fathers want them to learn rhetoric, but they want to learn wrestling. You teach reading, writing, arithmetic, and public speaking. Rhetoric is the crown jewel. If a student can insult someone using 3 metaphors and a reference to Homer, you've succeeded. Bonus points if they don't cry when challenged. You'll also throw in moral philosophy, just enough to make them sound profound at banquets. The curriculum? Classical literature, basic law, memorization, and lots of copying. Discipline is firm. If a student misbehaves, they get the rod. If the teacher snaps, he quietly weeps into a scroll. It's tradition. You recite Virgil, you quote Cicero, you try not to strangle Marcus when he asks for the 3rd time what metaphor means. There's almost no job security. Your pay comes from student fees, which means if the kids skip class or the parents get stingy, you're short on bread money. You compete with other tutors for attention, and there's always a rumor that someone across town is offering advanced rhetoric with snacks. The snacks are usually figs. Still, it's enough to sway a 12-year-old. Still, teaching can be rewarding. A well-spoken student reflects well on you. Some go on to become lawyers, senators, or famously sarcastic philosophers. Your name might be mentioned in a speech decades later, ideally not as a cautionary tale. Sometimes a grateful student gifts you wine. Sometimes they spell your name right. If you're lucky, you'll get hired as a private tutor for a noble family. That means better pay, fewer interruptions, and at least one couch, but also greater pressure. Mess up, and you'll be explaining to a senator why his son just called the governor a donkey in hexameter. You're expected to inspire, educate, and keep little Lucius from setting fire to the scroll cabinet. So if you enjoy dusty scrolls, verbal sparring, and molding the minds of tomorrow's corrupt elite, Roman education has a seat for you. Just don't forget to bring your own chair, and maybe a backup rod, and a second backup rod, and a flask of patience. So you like attention, you crave applause, you think your facial expressions are a gift from the gods, and your ability to fall downstairs dramatically should be witnessed by thousands. Congratulations, you're exactly the sort of person who'd end up an actor in ancient Rome. Or worse, a mime. The Roman entertainment industry was loud, chaotic, and bursting with questionable taste. And it needed people like you, people willing to don masks, shout iambic insults, dance badly in sandals, and get paid mostly in olives and pity. Theatre was technically legal, marginally respected, and fully dependent on how much wine the audience had consumed. Actors were considered essential but not honourable. You were famous and ignored at the same time. Crowds cheered your performances, but the Senate still thought you were one toga tear away from societal collapse. The upper class watched from balconies while pretending they weren't laughing. The lower class threw turnips when you messed up your lines. As an actor, your tools were your voice, your body, and your tolerance for open-air humiliation. You performed plays, comedies, tragedies, sometimes both at once, and relied on exaggerated gestures and stylized masks to get the point across to a half-distracted audience. If someone started juggling fruit mid-monologue, you just yelled louder. And then there were the mimes, not silent French clowns. Roman mimes were raunchy, wild, and wildly popular. Their shows included crude jokes, slapstick violence, surprise nudity, and the occasional impromptu political commentary, which could get you very arrested. Mimes had zero script, zero shame, and maximum audience participation. If you couldn't improvise, you'd better know how to run. Rehearsals, optional. Props, limited. Prestige. Don't hold your breath, but you did have fans. Children loved you. Drunk men adored you. And once, if your timing was perfect, a senator might accidentally smile in your direction. Of course, you lived on the edge of scandal. You couldn't legally run for office or marry into a respectable family, but you could absolutely headline a festival with a show titled Bacchus and the Naughty Vase. The pay varied wildly. Some actors became rich, touring cities, entertaining governors, and avoiding tax collectors by dying dramatically mid-performance, then returning as a new character with a different name. Others were penniless, sleeping in backstage corners and trading jokes for soup. Still, the adrenaline of applause was a powerful drug. When the crowd laughed, when they stood up and clapped, when a child screamed with joy at your pratfall, those moments made you a god, a ridiculous, underpaid, underdressed god. You weren't just entertainment, you were escape. You helped Romans forget their problems, if only for an hour. And maybe, just maybe, you planted the seed of a better joke in someone else's mind. One day, they'd retell it at dinner and pretend they made it up. That's legacy, Roman style. If you can juggle insults, dance through hecklers, and deliver a monologue about betrayal while dodging figs and dodgier reviews, the stage is yours. Just don't forget your mask, or your dignity. You probably left it behind in Act 1. You want to make something beautiful, something that lasts, something that might sit on a nobleman's shelf for 500 years and eventually be unearthed by a confused archaeologist. Welcome to the world of Roman artisans, where your masterpiece is either praised, smashed, or used as a soup bowl. Let's start with potters. You wake before dawn, hands already coated in clay. Your wheel is wonky, your kiln is temperamental, and your assistant has knocked over 3 vases before breakfast. Still you mould amphorae, urns, jugs, little statues of Jupiter with disproportionate arms. You make it all. Pottery is essential. Every home needs it. Every merchant sells it. Every temple breaks at least one a week during ceremonies involving wine, goats, or surprise fires. You shape, fire, glaze, repeat. Your fingerprints are all over history, literally, and every crack tells a story, usually one involving clumsy priests. Painters, you've got it worse. You're either frescoing walls for the wealthy or painting theatrical backdrops for drunk audiences. You mix your own pigments, grind minerals, crush berries, and pray the red doesn't turn pink. Some clients want realism, others want their portraits to include six-pack abs and none of their actual wives. You're an artist, a therapist, and a magician. As a painter, your work might hang in a villa, it might decorate a bathhouse, it might end up graffitied with something obscene. Art is subjective, especially when commissioned by someone who insists their dog be painted more heroically. Artisans lived in a strange limbo. Your work was everywhere, but you weren't always recognized for it. The senator shows off your mosaic, but he tells guests a friend made it. You get paid sometimes in coin, sometimes in bread, sometimes in the leftover wine they didn't like. Your invoice gets used as a coaster. Still, there's pride. You craft beauty in a world full of grime. You make color where there's dust. You tell stories in glaze and plaster. You give the gods something shiny to stare at. You turn mud into meaning. You give shape to status and function to faith. And let's not forget the mosaic artists. You spend weeks hunched over tiny tiles, assembling elaborate floor stories no one will appreciate until they fall and hit their heads on them. But when you step back and see a scene of Neptune riding dolphins across a stormy sea, perfection. The best part? You get to sign your work, even if it's just a hidden scratch under the base. Made by Publius, who didn't cry this time. So if you can tolerate fumes, critique, long hours, and endless requests for just one more lion, artistry in Rome might be for you. You won't be rich, but you'll be remembered. Even if it's just by a museum intern 2,000 years from now, wondering why every vase has eyes. So you've got a steady hand, an eye for style, and an alarming comfort level with sharp objects near exposed throats. Time to open shop as a Roman barber. But don't get too cozy with your clippers. This job involves way more blood, spit, and social intrigue than you think. A Roman barber, or tonsor, was part hairstylist, part therapist, part battlefield medic. Your workspace is either a tiny storefront in a noisy forum or a folding chair next to the bathhouse drain. Clients wander in daily, demanding trims, shaves, shoulder massages, wound cleanings, and the occasional amateur surgery. Because apparently if you hold a razor, you're qualified to lance boils. Barbers were the epicenter of gossip. People talked while being shaved. They ranted. They confessed. Some even bribed you to keep quiet, which of course meant you absolutely did not. You were the human version of a town crier with scissors. Senators, merchants, poets, slaves, they all came in for a cut and a bit of catharsis. You came for the denarii and stayed for the drama. Shaving was an event. No mirrors, no moisturizers, just soap made from suspicious fat, a blade sharp enough to split a hair, and a prayer that your hand didn't slip during someone's story about their neighbour's affair. Miss a patch and you're lazy, nick an ear and you're a butcher, do both and you're hired for a wedding. And then there was bloodletting. Yes, barbers handled that too. Got a fever? Time to drain you like wine from a cracked amphora. Feeling imbalanced? Let's open a vein and let the humours sort themselves out. If you weren't squeamish, it was lucrative. If you were, the job cured that fast, or got you fired. Barbers also doubled as social gatekeepers. They knew who was sleeping with whom, whose debts were piling up, who switched political factions, and which senator's wig had seen better centuries. Want to ruin a rival? Bribe the barber. Want to protect a secret? Overpay the barber. Either way, they knew your scalp and your scandals. If you got good, you got popular, lines formed, appointments were whispered about in elite circles, your hands shaped reputations, your razors silenced rumors or spread them. You might even be summoned to style a gladiator before his big fight, or remove a tick from a priest, or groom a goat before its sacrificial debut. Barbers didn't just shape beards, they shaped narratives. In the bathhouse, they were the main event. People lingered not just for the shave, but for the social update. News broke in your chair. Politics shifted over hot towels. You had the pulse of the city and a blade close to its throat. It was a strange job. Humble, yes, but powerful, in the way only someone holding a razor can be. You weren't nobility, but nobility came to you. You didn't wear a crown, but your word could ruin someone who did. So, if you've got quick fingers, a thick skin, and no problem doubling as a therapist with knives, welcome to the bathhouse circuit. Just don't forget to sterilize between secrets, and maybe keep one hand near the exit. Not everyone loves a close shave. If you're looking for early hours, volcanic temperatures, and the deep existential dread of watching your entire income burn because of one misjudged fire, welcome to Roman baking. The job is hot, hard, and deeply underappreciated until someone skips breakfast. Then you're public enemy number one. Bakers woke before dawn, not poetic dawn, actual still dark. can't see your own hands dawn. You shuffle into your cramped bakery, where the oven, usually a domed beehive shape made of brick, is already blazing like an angry volcano. No safety gear, no timers, just instinct, a paddle, and hope. Roman bread came in many forms: flat, round, scored, seeded, sacrificial. The most famous was panis quadratus, the loaf with the iconic wheel-like scoring. But don't get romantic. Most loaves were dense, dry, and carried the subtle crunch of residual ash. Still, it fed the empire, and you were the hands behind it. You mixed flour, water, and salt in large troughs with enough force to qualify as cardio. Yeast wasn't reliable, so you counted on sourdough starters and the gods of fermentation. Once mixed, the dough was formed, marked to show the bakery and baker, and thrown into the oven on wooden paddles. Overbake it, it's a brick. Undercook it, it's a lawsuit. Drop it, that's lunch. Bake it perfectly. Nobody says thank you, but at least you didn't start a fire this time. But baking wasn't just about the bread, it was about distribution. You served local households, temples, who needed offerings, markets, and even the military. Miss a delivery to the army, and suddenly you're getting a visit from someone with a sword and no sense of humor. Sometimes you stamped the bread. Yes, you left your literal mark. Baked by Secundus at the 4th hour. It was pride, advertising, and evidence all in one. Archaeologists still find loaves with names branded into the crust like edible business cards. The work was grueling. You stood all day, sweat into the dough, got flour in places flour should never go, and endured complaints from people who couldn't tell the difference between barley and wheat, but definitely knew your loaf was less fluffy than yesterday. Still, there was something satisfying in watching your carts roll out at sunrise, full of bread that would feed hundreds. You were the first one awake, the first one to work, and often the last one thanked. But the city ran on your crusty little discs of dough. If you ever got really good, you might be hired to supply a festival or a noble household or even the imperial kitchens. That meant better pay, more ovens, and the eternal thrill of never sleeping again. On good days, you felt like the god of carbs. On bad days, you questioned your life choices while sweeping burnt crumbs. So if you don't mind burns, backaches, or rising with the crows, Roman baking could be for you. Just don't eat all the profits. And never ever forget the salt. People get weird about that, like civil unrest, weird. Let's say you enjoy secrets. You like listening without being noticed. You know how to smile while extracting gossip. And you don't flinch when someone casually mentions treason. Congratulations. You might be qualified for one of Rome's most shadowy professions, the spy. In Rome, espionage wasn't reserved for the battlefield. Sure, military scouts existed, but the real action happened in taverns, bathhouses, senate halls, and bedrooms. Spies were everywhere. Some were hired by magistrates, others by rival merchants. A few worked for the emperor, and a terrifying number worked for themselves. Your resume? Flexibility, anonymity, and the ability to lie better than a poet with gambling debts. Your tools were ears, charm, forged scrolls, and the sudden vanishing act. Being forgettable was your superpower. If people remembered you, you were doing it wrong, or you were about to be stabbed. Spies infiltrated all walks of life. You might pose as a slave in a senator's household, or a scribe in a military office, or a wandering philosopher who's definitely not eavesdropping. You attend events, nod thoughtfully, and casually memorize details that could get half the guests exiled. You learn to read lips, remember whispered phrases, and act like you had no idea what the governor's mistress said in the atrium yesterday. You're paid in hush money, favors, or protection from the very people you're betraying. And the job perks? Access to powerful gossip, early retirement, voluntary or forced, and the ability to say, I can't confirm or deny, in 3 languages. If you're good, you'll never need to buy your own wine again. People bribe you with it just to keep your mouth shut. Informants, your less glamorous cousins, were everywhere too. Tavern owners, doormen, fruit vendors, anyone who heard things and passed them along to the right people for the right price. Some did it for coin, Some did it for revenge, some just liked watching the world burn. There's a rumor that one fig seller brought down a praetor by strategically dropping eaves while selling underripe produce. You worked in shadows, but you lit fires. You spread rumors that toppled marriages, elections, even whole provinces. Your whispers shaped policy. Your silences protected conspiracies. You were invisible and indispensable, and it wasn't always glamorous. You slept in alleys, paid in whispers, followed targets across cities, and had to keep 20 lies straight at once. You made eye contact only when necessary. You knew 20 ways to disappear and 20 more to make someone else vanish. The danger was constant. If you got caught, there were no court appeals. You disappeared, maybe into exile, maybe into the Tiber, maybe into a very small amphora. So you learned to vanish before your targets realized what you were. You built fake identities like mosaics, colorful, intricate, fragile under scrutiny. But if you were clever, you rose fast. You could blackmail your way into power, whisper your way into influence. Suggest a rumor that topples a rival. In a city where perception shaped reality, the one who controlled the whispers controlled the world. So if you can lie without blinking, betray with a smile, and disappear without footprints, Rome has a job for you. Just remember, paranoia isn't a side effect. It's the dress code. So you're not into blood, dust, or politics. You want to make people feel things, joy, sorrow, the impulse to throw coins into your cup. Welcome to the life of a Roman musician, a world of constant festivals, erratic patrons, and the never-ending sound of someone tuning a lyre badly. Musicians in Rome weren't just background noise. They were essential to almost everything. Religious ceremonies, military parades, private dinners, theatre, and public executions, music was always involved. And whether you were playing a delicate hymn or blasting a trumpet next to a sweaty legionnaire, you were part of the show. Instrument choices included lyres, panpipes, flutes, horns, and drums that looked like props from a gladiator film. Mastering them required practice, stamina, and tolerance for the smell of whatever animal the drumhead came from. Performances varied, from soft serenades under moonlight to deafening solos in front of drunk crowds demanding an encore. And yes, sometimes you had to sing through hiccups caused by bad wine. Flute girls and boys were hired entertainers, musicians / dancers / flirting professionals. They played at parties, accompanied poetry readings, or stood near altars looking mysterious. Their job was to charm, distract, and occasionally distract you from the fact that the wine had turned. Their instruments were delicate, their makeup heavier than some soldier's armor, and their routines both graceful and suggestive. Being a musician had its perks. If you were good, you were invited everywhere. Villas, festivals, temples, orgies, musical accompaniment optional. You got tips, applause, maybe a patron. If you were bad, you got fruit, sometimes pre-chewed. You learned to tell the mood of a room by the type of grape thrown. You traveled light, instruments, tunics, charm. You learned to navigate the party circuit, know when to switch from tragic to cheerful, know which god likes which hymn, know how to fake a smile when someone requests that one Bacchus song for the 8th time. But it wasn't all wine and applause. You were often overlooked, underpaid, and asked to play over arguments, vomiting, or the dying words of a gladiator. You played anyway, because the music mattered, because you could shift the mood with a single note, because sometimes, for just a moment, the crowd listened, and because no one else could make panpipes sound tragic. You worked for applause, not stability. You juggled flutes and expectations. You sang to emperors and drunks. You performed in temples, tenements, and taverns with equal dedication. The only constant? Your song and the rhythm of Roman chaos. Even the gods, if you were lucky, might stop to listen. So if you've got rhythm, resilience, and the ability to play through chaos, the Roman music scene needs you. Bring your flute, bring your nerves, and maybe bring a backup lyre in case the crowd gets rowdy. And please, for the love of Apollo, tune your strings first. Let's say you're not afraid of rejection, enjoy shouting at strangers, and can describe fish in 3 poetic metaphors before breakfast. Congratulations! Welcome to the world of the Roman street vendor, where your voice is louder than your paycheck and your cart has more character than your resume. Vendors were the city's heartbeat. At every street corner, alleyway, forum entrance, and temple gate, someone was selling something. Bread, wine, honey cakes, figs, spices, goat cheese, sandals, incense, dubious amulets, and occasionally stolen bath towels, gently used. Rome was noisy, and vendors made it noisier, turning every public space into a market and every conversation into a pitch. Your job began before dawn. You hauled your goods through crowded streets, dodged chamber pots, bribed a guard for a good corner, and started yelling. Not gently, not conversationally. Yelling, loud, fast, competitive shouts designed to attract anyone with ears. If you hesitated, the olive guy next to you would steal your customers with a joke and a jingle. You needed a voice like a trumpet, a sales pitch like poetry, and the endurance of a legionnaire. You screamed about your wares while balancing baskets, fending off stray dogs, dodging flying cabbage, and charming old ladies who demanded discounts and 3 free samples. The competition? Brutal. Someone always had cheaper grapes, sweeter honey, or a more convincing backstory about why their dates were blessed by Mercury himself. You learned fast, adapted faster, and lied creatively. Limited quantity. Fresh from the forum. Healed my cousin's sciatica. You also needed street smarts. Watch out for thieves. Look out for officials demanding taxes. Be ready to pack up and run if the mood turned or a festival parade trampled your setup. Flexibility was survival. So was knowing when to turn your cart into a snack stand and when to pretend you were just passing through. And the customers? All kinds. Locals, tourists, priests, senators' mistresses, escaped goats. You learned faces, remembered preferences, threw in an extra fig for loyalty, or 2 for silence. Repeat business was everything. So was smiling while being yelled at by someone who just licked a pear and decided they didn't want it. But being a vendor wasn't just about sales, it was about showmanship. You had to make people want your goods with nothing but your words and your charisma. You were a walking advertisement, a persuasive poet, a one-person theatre troupe with tomatoes. You told jokes, you recited slogans, you danced if that's what sealed the deal. The city depended on you. Vendors were walking logistics chains. You got food to bellies, sandals to feet, and gossip to everyone who stood within 5 feet of your fig crate. You delivered more than goods. You delivered energy. The daily buzz, the hum of trade in a city constantly spinning. The money wasn't great, but it kept you fed, gave you stories, and maybe, if you were very lucky, a chance to someday move from street cart to permanent stall with a roof and fewer rats. And if the gods smiled, your own apprentice to yell at in 20 years. So if you've got lungs of steel, charm like a con man, and no shame about singing the praises of fermented fish paste at 6 a.m., the streets of Rome are waiting. Just bring your loudest voice and enough change to bribe the guard again. If you've got a strong stomach, a quiet presence, and zero fear of things that go bump in the tomb, Rome has a place for you, underground. Welcome to the funeral industry, where jobs range from reverent to ridiculous, often in the same shift. Let's start with grave diggers. You wake early, grab a shovel, and head to the outskirts of the city, because the law says no burying inside the walls unless you're extremely rich or extremely dead in a symbolic way. You dig graves in sun, rain, or whatever mysterious fog hangs over the necropolis that day. You get no applause, just calluses, mud, and the chance to overhear some very weird eulogies. You learn to keep your mouth shut when a senator's widow starts crying on your tunic. Then there are undertakers and funeral organizers. Their job? Coordinate the procession, hire musicians, rent professional mourners, and make sure nobody trips over the urn. They work with the family to craft a funeral that's part sacred ritual, part theatrical performance, and all logistical nightmare. You'll spend more time calming feuding relatives than arranging flowers. Mourning in Rome was loud. People wailed. tore their clothes, beat their chests. If you couldn't muster genuine tears, you could hire someone who would. Enter the praefici, professional mourners, often women, who could cry on cue and make the deceased sound like a divine hero, even if they'd been a lousy neighbor. They were paid by the volume of their grief and sometimes competed for the loudest lament. Imagine your final send-off being scored like an emotional Olympic event. And then we get to the real stars of Roman funerals, the clowns. Yes, clowns. Archimimi were performers who mimicked the dead during the procession, exaggerating their habits and quirks, sometimes in full costume. Imagine a mime dressed like your Uncle Gaius, limping down the road and pretending to trip over nothing, while a band plays a solemn tune. It was half honor, half roast, and entirely unforgettable. Some people paid extra to make sure the mimic remembered all the embarrassing parts. It might sound bizarre, but these roles had purpose. Romans believed honoring the dead helped ensure peace with the spirits. Funerals were transitions, not just for the deceased, but for the community. And someone had to shovel cry and joke their way through it. You learned to respect silence, handle awkward families, and dodge questions like, "Do you think he made it to the good afterlife?" You developed a dark sense of humor and a firm handshake. You smelled like incense, soil, and grief. You saw every level of Roman society because death was the one thing they all had in common. The pay was decent, not great, but steady. People always died, even in peacetime, especially during feasts. You never ran out of work. You might not be remembered, but you would be needed. If nothing else, you'd know everyone's secrets by the time the last stone was laid. So if you can laugh softly, cry loudly, dig quickly, and eulogize convincingly while holding a wilted laurel wreath, there's a spot for you among Rome's least glamorous professionals. Just keep the clown makeup subtle. Nobody likes an overachiever in the afterlife. If your handwriting is legible and your patience unlimited, congratulations, you've just been hired as a Roman scribe. Welcome to a world of endless scrolls, wax tablets, and chronic back pain. It's not glamorous, but when emperors need speeches, lawyers need contracts, and widows need wills, you're the one they call. Scribes were the white-collar backbone of bureaucracy. You didn't swing hammers or herd goats. You wielded styluses and ink brushes. You sat in corners, at desks in tents, or under colonnades, scribbling away while the loud world of Rome spun on outside. You saw everything, said nothing, and remembered too much. You didn't make policy, you made it legible. Your training, years of schooling, memorizing letters, practicing calligraphy, learning Latin, Greek, law, curses, recipes, and the kind of gossip that never got written down. You had to write clearly, quickly, and for people who usually had no idea what they were signing. If your handwriting looked like angry chicken scratch, you'd be laughed out of the forum. You worked for magistrates, merchants, poets, and paranoid aristocrats who wanted every love note and debt confession perfectly transcribed. One minute you're writing contracts for land sales, the next you're taking dictation for a senator's autobiography, which may or may not be a complete work of fiction. You smile, nod, and spell the word humility for someone who clearly lacks it. You carried your tools everywhere: stylus, ink, parchment, wax tablets, and an expression of mild disappointment. You always looked busy, because you were. If you fell behind, documents piled up. If you made a mistake, it wasn't erased, it was scraped, carefully, with a knife, and hope. Some days you scraped more than you wrote. But scribes weren't just paper pushers. You had power. Not official power, but the kind that comes from knowing who owns what, who owes what, and who's trying to pretend otherwise. You wrote down the truths Rome didn't want spoken, and you kept copies, quietly, in a secret drawer, for rainy days. Your workspace? Chaotic, cramped, noisy, often shared with a parrot that had learned to quote tax laws. You worked through festivals, funerals, and mid-trial shouting matches. You copied scrolls until your fingers curled like overcooked garum shrimp. You developed permanent ink stains on your hands and an eye twitch that twitched in Latin. Still, the work was steady, if not noble, then at least useful. You didn't get statues, but you might get paid, and if you were very good, very discreet, you might be trusted with secret treaties or imperial decrees, or something truly scandalous like a senator's bad poetry collection. You read it, you wish you hadn't, so if you like ink stains, legal jargon, and pretending you didn't hear that confession about embezzling temple funds, being a scribe might be the perfect Roman job. Just bring your best handwriting and a cushion. Stone benches are murder on the spine, literally. Some Roman jobs involved ink, some involved bronze, and some involved poop. Welcome to the world of latrine maintenance, public toilet management, and all things unspeakably gross, yet utterly essential. If you've got a tolerance for smells, an iron stomach, and a profound lack of ego, Rome has just the hole in the ground for you. Rome had public toilets, communal spaces with rows of stone seats, sometimes featuring a modest privacy wall, but usually not. These weren't just for, business. They were social hubs. People chatted, senators debated, merchants negotiated prices, all while taking care of things. You didn't go to the toilet to escape the crowd, you went to join one. It was like a forum, except everyone was seated and slightly more relaxed. And when people flushed with the help of flowing water beneath the seats, someone had to make sure that water flowed. That's where you came in. A latrine worker, part plumber, part janitor, part silent witness to the worst decisions a diet of olives and fish sauce could produce. Your tools, buckets, scrapers, sponges, and the quiet resignation of a man who's already seen too much before breakfast. One of the most infamous tools, the tessorium, a sponge on a stick, shared among patrons and rinsed between uses, ideally. If you were on latrine duty, you were the one in charge of replacing these, washing them, and sometimes gently reminding guests not to steal them. Yes, people stole communal sponge sticks. Civilization is a spectrum, and so is hygiene. You haven't lived until you've had to negotiate the return of a soiled stick from a drunken senator. You also managed cesspits, drainage systems, and occasionally rats the size of chickens. If something backed up, you waded in. If something collapsed, you dug it out. If someone dropped their ring into the latrine and begged you to retrieve it, you considered a career change or charged a small fortune and silently wept. The hazards, legion, disease, slippery floors, bored teenagers lighting things on fire, strange mushrooms growing where no mushrooms should grow. There were unexpected eruptions, unexplainable leaks, and once a lizard that somehow lived off fumes alone. But the pay wasn't bad, relatively speaking. Cities paid to keep the stink down, the army paid to keep morale up, and rich patrons paid very well to make sure their villa latrines stayed functional and unembarrassing. The job required strength, discretion, and a sense of humor darker than a clogged aqueduct. You learned to tell what someone had eaten last week based on the aroma. You became immune to shame. You developed a sixth sense for oncoming blockage. You were the ghost in the pipes, the keeper of Rome's bowels, the silent guardian of dignity no one wanted to talk about. So if you don't mind what you step in, can hold your breath for unnatural amounts of time, and believe that dignity is overrated when compared to job security, the latrine world welcomes you. Just watch your step and don't shake hands without a rinse, and maybe bring an extra pair of sandals, just in case. You've survived 29 Roman job trials. You've dug graves, rowed warships, sold olives, copied scrolls, dodged lions, and gotten insulted by a toga-wearing child during a flute solo. You've sweated in tunnels, cried at funerals, bled in kitchens, and begged Jupiter for better lighting in a temple pantry. You even touched a sponge on a stick, and not in a metaphorical way. That's commitment. And yet, you're still unemployed. Why? Well, maybe it's the accent. Maybe it's the resume scratched into the back of a wine label. Or maybe it's the way you showed up to the interview in a tunic that says, "I survived Pompeii and all I got was this lousy ulcer." The truth is, ancient Rome didn't do job interviews the way we imagine. No HR rep, no chairs in a quiet office, no emailed rejection 5 days later. Rome was chaos. Work was who you knew, how fast you bribed them, or whether your father had once arm wrestled a senator. You got jobs through whispers, handshakes, bloodlines, or acts of minor heroism involving runaway goats or a flaming chariot incident. Qualifications? Optional. Attitude? Risky. Hygiene? Encouraged but not enforced. Interviews were conversations over wine, arguments during races, or sudden shouts in the street like, "You look sturdy, can you carry amphorae?" If your answer was, "How many and for how long?" Congrats, you're hired. And if you didn't get hired, it's not necessarily you. It's Rome, it's the gods, it's Mercury in retrospolia. It's the guy ahead of you in line who got the job because he once made Nero laugh by falling into a well and stayed there long enough to become a local attraction. Or maybe it's the fact that when someone asked for your previous experience, you described your gladiator phase as a deeply personal journey in the pursuit of not dying. Still don't despair, there's always a spot somewhere. Someone's always building, burying, baking, rowing, writing, sweeping, sacrificing, or stabbing, and all of them need help. Or someone to take the blame. If you're breathing, you're qualified. If you've got 2 working hands and a high tolerance for absurdity, you're overqualified. Rome never stops needing people who can lift, carry, clean, or convincingly pretend to know Latin declensions. So here's your final job tip. Don't aim for perfection. Aim for persistence. If the door's closed, try the window. If the window's bricked over, start digging. Rome wasn't built in a day, but someone definitely showed up early in the wrong outfit and somehow got promoted to senior aqueduct advisor. You may never get the job you wanted, but you'll get a job. Eventually. Even if it involves dressing as a tree for a Saturnalia parade while holding a flaming torch and reciting goat poetry. Now dust off your sandals, fix your tunic, and go back out there. You're late for an unpaid internship in vomitorium sanitation. You start yesterday. There's a mop with your name on it, a pile of unidentified goo, and a very judgmental statue watching from the corner. Smile. The Empire is always hiring. Especially if you know how to fake confidence and can carry a barrel without falling into it. Twice.